I'll never forget the moment my mom looked at me with complete confusion and asked, "Are you the new nurse?" I stood there frozen, as the weight of what was happening hit me. This wasn't just another memory slip. This was my mother, the woman who'd raised me, taught me to ride a bike and helped me through every heartbreak, not recognizing her own daughter. I was 32. She was only 58. And in that moment, standing in her living room on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. The early-onset Alzheimer's that had been slowly taking her from us for 3 years had just crossed a threshold I wasn't prepared for. This is our story, my mom's, mine, and the millions of families navigating the complicated reality of loving someone through memory loss. Looking back, the signs were there long before any of us were ready to acknowledge them. Mom had always been meticulously organized, the type who color-coded her calendar and remembered everyone's birthdays without Facebook reminders. So when she started missing appointments or forgetting conversations we just had, we made excuses. She's just stressed. She's not sleeping well. It's just normal aging. I think we all do this. Find the most benign explanation because the alternatives are too frightening to consider. The first truly undeniable moment came during our annual family Christmas dinner. Mom had made the same turkey recipe for 20 years, her mother's recipe that she knew by heart. But that day, standing in the kitchen, she turned to me with panic in her eyes and whispered, "I don't remember how to do this." She was holding the turkey baster, staring at it like it was some alien object she'd never seen before. I laughed it off, quickly pulling up the recipe on my phone, pretending I needed it too. But that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my car in her driveway and cried. Something was wrong. Really wrong. And I was terrified of what it might be. Getting to a diagnosis wasn't straightforward. Mom was only 55 when we first sought medical help, decades younger than most people with Alzheimer's. The first doctor suggested stress and prescribed antidepressants. The second thought it might be early menopause, affecting her cognitive function. It took 8 months, 3 doctors and a battery of cognitive tests, brain scans, and even a spinal tap before we heard the words, "Early-onset Alzheimer's disease." I remember the neurologist's office vividly, the beige walls, the faint smell of hand sanitizer, the box of tissues strategically placed on the desk that suddenly seemed ominous. Mom sat there, nodding calmly as the doctor explained what was happening in her brain. Proteins building up, connections failing, memories becoming harder to access. "So I'm not crazy," she said with a small, sad smile. I knew something was wrong. That's the cruel irony of early Alzheimer's. There's often enough awareness to know you're losing yourself. Mom understood what this diagnosis meant. She'd watched her own grandfather decline from dementia years before. And now, at an age when most people are planning retirement adventures, she was facing a very different future. The literature says Alzheimer's progresses gradually, but that wasn't our experience with early onset. The changes came quickly, especially in that first year after diagnosis. It was like once her brain acknowledged something was wrong, it accelerated the decline. Mom had been a high school English teacher for 30 years. Words were her life, her passion. But suddenly she'd stop mid-sentence, unable to find common words. "Can you pass the thing you eat with?" she'd ask, growing frustrated when she couldn't remember fork. The woman who had spent decades analyzing Shakespeare was now struggling with basic vocabulary. Then came the repetition. She'd tell the same story 3 times in one conversation, not remembering she'd just shared it. She'd call me multiple times a day, asking the same questions. At first, I gently reminded her, "Mom, we just talked about this an hour ago, remember?" But I quickly learned that was the wrong approach. It only highlighted her deficits and caused anxiety. Instead, I started responding as if hearing it for the first time, which brought her comfort rather than confusion. The hardest part, though, was watching her lose her independence piece by piece. First, we took away the car keys after she got lost driving to the grocery store she'd shopped at for 20 years. Then came supervised medication, because she'd either forget to take her pills or take them multiple times. Eventually, we installed monitoring systems in her home after she left the stove on overnight. Each of these steps felt like a betrayal, even though they were necessary for her safety. I was becoming the parent to my parent, and neither of us was ready for that role reversal. About 3 years into her diagnosis came the moment I mentioned earlier, when Mom didn't recognize me. I'd stopped by unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, something I often did since I lived nearby. She opened the door, and I immediately noticed the confusion in her eyes. "Are you the new nurse?" she asked politely. I thought she was joking at first. "Mom, it's me. It's Sarah." She studied my face, trying so hard to place me. "I'm sorry, I don't. Do I know you?" In all the research I'd done, in all the support groups I'd attended, nothing had prepared me for how those words would feel. I'd heard other caregivers talk about this milestone, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It felt like having the wind knocked out of me. I took a deep breath, smiled, and simply said, "I'm Sarah. I'm here to visit with you today." She seemed relieved to have context and invited me in. We sat and looked through old photo albums, and for brief moments, glimpses of recognition flickered across her face. "That's my daughter," she'd say, pointing to pictures of me. "She's so wonderful. She could recognize me in photographs, but not standing right in front of her." The disease's selective destruction of memory is baffling that way. Later that day, after an hour of pleasant but distant conversation, something shifted. She reached out, touched my hand, and said, "Sarah, you're here." For that brief moment, the fog had lifted. And then, just as quickly, it descended again, and I became a friendly stranger once more. That day marked a turning point for me. I realized I needed to stop waiting for Mom to come back to me, and instead learn how to meet her where she was. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's that arguing with someone with Alzheimer's about what's real is pointless and often cruel. Their perception is their reality. And the kindest thing we can do is step into that reality with them, rather than trying to drag them back to ours. Mom started talking about her parents as if they were still alive, even though they'd passed years ago. My first instinct was to correct her. "No, Mom, Grandma died in 2010, remember?" But all that did was cause her distress, forcing her to grieve their loss all over again, because in her mind it was fresh news. I learned instead to ask questions. "What do you love most about your mom?" This would light her up, allowing her to share happy memories without confronting the painful reality of loss. There was the time she became convinced that her childhood home was just down the street, and she needed to go check on it. Rather than explaining that we were actually 2 states away from where she grew up, I suggested we look at photos of that home together. We spent a wonderful afternoon with her, describing every detail of the house she grew up in, The creaky third stair, the apple tree in the backyard, the window seat where she'd read for hours. In entering her reality, I got to learn things about her childhood that I'd never known before. This approach, what dementia care specialists call validation therapy, became our lifeline. It wasn't about pretending or patronizing. It was about connecting with the person still there, even as the disease progressed. Alzheimer's isn't a disease that affects just one person. It transforms entire families. My relationship with my brother, who lives across the country, became strained as the burden of daily care fell primarily to me. He'd fly in every few months, full of opinions about Mom's care, then leave again, not understanding the day-to-day reality. We had heated arguments about everything from medication management to whether she should still be living at home. It took a particularly difficult Christmas, with Mom repeatedly asking who these people in her house were, for my brother to truly grasp the situation. That night after Mom had gone to bed, he broke down. "I've been in denial," he admitted. "I didn't want to believe it was this bad." After that, we became a team. He couldn't provide daily physical support, but he took over managing Mom's finances, dealing with insurance companies, and researching clinical trials. He also set up regular video calls with Mom, understanding that even if she didn't always remember who he was, the interaction still brought her joy in the moment. My marriage felt the strain too. The mental and emotional load of caregiving seeped into every aspect of my life. Date nights were cut short because I was constantly checking my phone, worried about Mom. Vacations became nearly impossible to plan. My husband was supportive, but admitted feeling like Alzheimer's had become the third person in our marriage. We eventually started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping families of dementia patients. She helped us establish boundaries, create self-care routines, and find ways to maintain our connection even as caregiving demanded so much of my energy. It wasn't perfect, but it kept us from becoming another caregiver divorce statistic, and unfortunately, those statistics are staggeringly high for spouses of primary caregivers. One of the most difficult lessons I've learned is that I cannot be an effective caregiver if I'm running on empty. Early on, I tried to do it all, work full-time, check on Mom multiple times a day, manage her appointments, keep my marriage healthy, maintain friendships. I became snappish, constantly exhausted, and developed stress-related health problems of my own. A turning point came when I found myself in the emergency room with what I thought was a heart attack, but turned out to be a severe panic attack. The doctor who treated me asked about my life situation, and when I explained about Mom, he said something I'll never forget. "Your mother's brain is sick, but if you don't take care of yourself, your body will get sick too. And then who will care for her?" That wake-up call forced me to acknowledge I needed help. I joined an Alzheimer's caregivers support group, where for the first time, I was surrounded by people who truly understood what I was going through. No explanations needed, no judgment when I admitted to darker feelings of resentment or grief. Just nodding heads and been there, understanding. I also learned to accept and ask for help, something that didn't come naturally to me. Friends had often said, "Let me know if there's anything I can do," but I never took them up on it. Now I became specific. "Could you sit with Mom on Thursday evening so I can go to my book club?" Most people genuinely want to help, they just need direction on how. The most significant change was hiring part-time professional caregivers, despite my initial guilt about outsourcing Mom's care. These trained professionals not only gave me breathing room, but also taught me better ways to handle difficult behaviors and communication challenges. The financial cost was substantial, but the cost to my physical and mental health of trying to do it all alone was far greater. Let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough with Alzheimer's: the staggering financial burden. The average cost of caring for someone with Alzheimer's can exceed $350,000 over the course of the disease. And contrary to what many believe, Medicare covers very little of long-term care. Mom had been prudent financially. She had savings, a modest pension from her teaching career, and long-term care insurance she'd purchased in her 40s. But even with these resources, the financial strain became enormous as her care needs increased. In-home care agencies charge anywhere from $25 to $40 per hour. Memory care facilities can cost $7,000 to $12,000 per month. Medications, medical equipment, home modifications for safety, the expenses pile up quickly and relentlessly. We faced difficult decisions. Should we use her retirement savings to keep her at home with 24/7 care, knowing the money would run out faster? Or transition her to a memory care facility sooner to stretch the finances further? These aren't just financial calculations, they're emotional ones, laden with guilt and uncertainty. I found myself becoming an expert in things I never wanted to know about: Medicaid spend-down requirements, elder law, power of attorney limitations. I learned that many families go bankrupt caring for loved ones with dementia, often sacrificing their own financial futures in the process. This isn't meant to scare anyone, but rather to emphasize the importance of early financial planning. Having difficult conversations about long-term care insurance, advance directives, and financial power of attorney, while your loved one can still participate in these decisions, is invaluable. It's a gift to them and to yourself. Despite the heartbreak, financial strain, and exhaustion, there's something I need to emphasize. There can still be beautiful moments along this journey. Alzheimer's doesn't immediately erase the person you love. It changes them, yes, but glimpses of their essence remain, sometimes in surprising ways. Mom lost the ability to follow the plot of a novel, but she could still recite poetry she'd memorized decades ago, word for word, with perfect inflection. We'd sit together, and I'd start the first line of Robert Frost's "The Road Not Taken," and she'd continue, her face lighting up with the pleasure of the familiar words. Music became our most reliable connection. Mom's verbal abilities declined, but she could still sing every word to Beatles songs. We'd have dance parties in her living room, and for those few minutes, the disease seemed to recede. Neurologists explain this phenomenon, how music activates different brain pathways than speech, but to us, it just felt like magic. There was unexpected humor too. Mom developed a frankness that was sometimes startling but often funny. She'd make observations about people that the old, filter-conscious mom would never have voiced. "That man's ears are enormous," she stage whispered in a waiting room once, sending me into a fit of laughter I couldn't control. I learned to look for these moments of connection, rather than focusing on what was lost. To celebrate when she remembered a small detail from the past, even if she couldn't recall what she had for breakfast. To appreciate her ability to still feel joy, even if she couldn't remember why she was happy. This mindset shift didn't happen overnight. It came gradually, with the help of other caregivers who were further along in their journeys. They taught me that while Alzheimer's takes away memories, it doesn't have to take away moments of happiness in the present. 4 years after Mom's diagnosis, we reached a turning point. She had wandered out of her house at 2 a.m. in winter, wearing only her nightgown. A neighbor found her 3 blocks away, confused and hypothermic. It became clear that even with part-time in-home care, keeping her safe at home was no longer possible. The decision to move Mom to a memory care facility was agonizing. I felt like I was abandoning her, breaking an unspoken promise to keep her at home. But her neurologist was gentle but firm. This isn't a failure on your part. It's simply the progression of the disease requiring a higher level of care than one person, or even a small team, can provide. At home, finding the right facility was its own challenge. I toured more than a dozen places, armed with a checklist of questions about staff-to-resident ratios, activities for residents, how they handle difficult behaviors, and their approach to medication. I observed how staff interacted with residents. Were they rushing them through meals, speaking to them like children, or treating them with dignity? The place we ultimately chose wasn't the fanciest or the most expensive. It was the one where I saw staff members kneeling down to make eye contact with residents in wheelchairs, where I heard laughter coming from the activity room, where the director knew every resident by name and could tell me something specific about each one's preferences and personality. Moving day was as difficult as I'd feared. Mom became agitated, repeatedly asking why we were in this strange place and when we could go home. The staff, experienced with this transition, suggested I leave after getting her settled in her room with familiar photos and her favorite blanket. Walking out that day, hearing her calling after me, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But something unexpected happened. Within a few weeks, Mom adjusted better than I had anticipated. The structured routine, consistent care, and social stimulation from other residents seemed to actually reduce her anxiety. When I visited, I'd often find her participating in music therapy or sitting in the garden with a new friend. She didn't recognize the place as home, but she appeared comfortable and content in the moment, which was all we could hope for at this stage. It's been 6 years since Mom's diagnosis. She now rarely recognizes me or other family members. Her vocabulary has shrunk to a few dozen words. She needs assistance with all basic activities of daily living: eating, dressing, bathing. But she still smiles when she hears music. She still reaches for my hand when I sit beside her, even if she doesn't know exactly who I am. There's still a person there, experiencing the world in a way I can't fully understand, but can still connect with through touch, music, and presence. I visit 4 times a week. Some days are better than others. There are visits where she's agitated or withdrawn, and I leave feeling drained and sad. But there are also visits where she'll suddenly look at me with complete clarity and say something that takes my breath away. Last month, after sitting quietly together looking through a photo album, she suddenly turned to me and said, "You're a good daughter." I don't know if she recognized me specifically in that moment or if she was speaking to some memory. But I choose to believe that somewhere deep inside, past all the tangles and plaques in her brain, she knows who I am and feels my love for her. This journey has transformed me in ways I never expected. I've discovered reserves of strength, patience, and resilience I didn't know I possessed. I've learned to find joy in small moments rather than waiting for big events. I've developed deeper empathy for others facing invisible struggles. Alzheimer's is teaching me, in the most difficult way possible, what it truly means to love someone unconditionally, not for what they can give back or even for shared memories, but simply for their being. If you're watching this because you're on a similar journey with someone you love, please know you're not alone. The Alzheimer's Association estimates that over 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease, and more than 11 million family members and friends are providing care. Behind each of those statistics is a story as complex and heartbreaking as my mom's. Here's what I wish someone had told me at the beginning. This road is incredibly difficult, but you don't have to walk it alone, and you don't have to figure it all out at once. Reach out for support, whether through formal organizations like the Alzheimer's Association, local support groups, online communities, or friends who are willing to listen without judgment. Accept help when it's offered. Prioritize your own health and well-being, because caregiver burnout is real and dangerous. Educate yourself about the disease, but remember that each person's experience with Alzheimer's is unique. What works for one family may not work for yours. Trust your instincts about what your loved one needs, while remaining open to guidance from healthcare professionals. Most importantly, try to meet your loved one where they are each day, rather than measuring them against who they used to be. Look for the person still there, behind the confusion and memory loss. They may not remember the details of your shared past, but they can still feel your love and presence in the moment. If you'd like to learn more about early-onset Alzheimer's, caregiving strategies, or support resources, check out the links in the description below. I've included organizations that have been lifelines for my family, as well as books and online communities that offer both practical advice and emotional support. And if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. This community of caregivers, family members, and friends has wisdom to share with each other that you won't find in any medical textbook. Thank you for listening to our story. Mom may not be able to tell it herself anymore, but in sharing it, a part of her lives on, the part that would want to help others facing the same challenges she has faced with such grace. Remember, you're doing better than you think you are. And you are not alone on this journey.